It took Dr. Olivo Tifantes, professor of medicine at the National School of Medicine in Brazil, to convince Boas to go public with his story, after which he did to a journalist and a member of the Brazilian military intelligence. Along with the incredible amount of detail Boas offered about the aliens, their wardrobe, and the craft itself, Boas was also found to be suffering from radiation poisoning, as he exhibited a plethora of other physical ailments for months after his experience. Was it an actual alien encounter, or was it the wild fantasy of a bored and possibly very lonely farmer? We'll let you decide as we move on to our second alien encounter. Made famous by the Hollywood film Fire in the Sky, the Travis Walton abduction story has become a hotbed of controversy. On November 5, 1975, Walton and 5 other loggers working in the Arizona wilderness piled into a truck for the drive home after a hard day's work. Minutes later, the crew spotted a bright light coming from behind a hill. Filled with curiosity, they drove closer until they could see a large silvery disc hovering just above a clearing. While the others stayed in the truck, a fascinated Walton leapt out and ran toward the disc, ignoring the shouts from the rest of his crew to get away and come back. As Walton approached the disc, it suddenly began to make sounds like a loud turbine and wobble from side to side, scaring Walton, who then began to back away. According to one of the men on Walton's crew, a beam of blue-green light shot out of the disc and struck Walton, sending him sprawling backwards. The terrified crew immediately put the truck into gear and hightailed it off the mountain and immediately called the police. Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison answered their call and came to meet the men, saying later that all of the men were distraught and 2 were in tears. Although skeptical of the story, he said if they were acting, they were awfully good at it. Within hours, a police search of the abduction site discovered nothing, and the next day an exhaustive search involving horses, helicopters, and jeeps still failed to discover anything. At this point, the police grew suspicious of the logging crew, believing the abduction story to be a cover for an accident or a murder. A polygraph test administered days later indicated that the men were not lying about their UFO sighting or that they had heard Walton. Days later, a disoriented Walton called his brother-in-law, Grant Neff, from a public phone. Rushed to a hospital, Walton relayed a story of being examined by aliens similar to the popular Greys described by other abductees, and having an encounter with a strangely human-like male and female alien who did not answer his questions, and at one point anesthetized him. A medical examination discovered a small puncture mark on his right arm, consistent with a hypodermic injection, but it was nowhere near a vein. His urine also showed a lack of ketones, which, if Walton had indeed been without food as he insisted, and as his weight loss suggested, should have been present as his body began breaking down fats in order to survive. To this day, Walton's story remains the stuff of controversy, with Walton failing a polygraph test on the TV game show called The Moment of Truth. Skeptics believe the entire story was made up for publicity, and also because Walton and his crew were severely behind in their logging contract. Walton's alleged abduction allowed them to secure an extension from the Arizona government. However, Walton's crew remained adamant for decades after the incident that the entire story was true. Even the police who first responded to the original frantic telephone call for help remarked at how visibly shaken and distraught the men appeared to be that night. Are aliens real? And if so, do they really routinely abduct humans for research? Should we be concerned? And should our governments be doing more to try to protect us from this terrifying threat? It's ultimately easy to dismiss alien abduction stories as mere fantasies made up out of boredom for attention or to get oneself out of trouble. But sometimes the physical evidence can be perplexing and begs the question, just how did a 1950s Brazilian farmer working his fields in the remote countryside end up with radiation sickness, skin lesions, and a host of other perplexing physical ailments? It's May 1951 and the Korean War has been raging for a year. The world is still weary from the ravages of World War II, and the United States is the only nation capable of leading a UN response to the attempts by the communist North to seize South Korea and unify the peninsula by force. The conflict has set the stage for a defining age in human history, the Cold War, and soon a regiment of American soldiers will find that curious visitors from another world may also be interested in how this war plays out. The Americans are 60 miles north of Seoul. The jungle is thick and oppressive. The North Koreans have been pushed back from South Korea in a brilliant inter-movement carried out by U.S. forces. Rather than risk being destroyed completely, North Korea forces quickly retreated into the north as U.S.-led NATO troops attempted to encircle them with an amphibious landing. Despite these military successes, though, the troops are nervous. At every sunrise, every man on the front lines has one question on their lips. Have the Soviets joined the war? Have we finally started World War III? Private First Class Francis P. Wall and his platoon are providing security for a detachment of artillery, which is itself preparing to rain down fire on a village full of North Korean forces. Men watch the jungle around them cautiously. Despite being a few miles from the official front, raiding parties against the American artillery are not uncommon. The artillery is set to fire just before dawn, and the villagers below have all been warned of the impending attack and told to flee. As the hour approaches, the big guns begin opening up. Artillery shells whiz through the air, bursting just above the village and showering the North Korean troops below with deadly shrapnel. The thunderous booms echo across the hills as a dozen guns open up one by one and deliver death to the enemy. Suddenly, though, Private Wall and other men responsible for providing security for the artillery see something in the hills above the village. It seems that the bombardment has attracted the attention of something none of the men will ever be able to explain. The light is dim at first, but quickly grows in brightness as it moves down the jungle hill. To the Americans, it appears like a floating jack-o'-lantern, emitting some kind of light from its body that is, at first, orange. To their shock, the light moves just over the village, even as the American artillery continues to pour fire into it. The air-bursting shells detonate all around it, and then the light does something incredible. In a move that defies all known physics, the light is able to rapidly move to the side of an exploding shell, avoiding being directly hit by the rounds. Even avoiding the threat, the object, which by now the men know must be some sort of craft, must have some sort of protective shielding, as it's still being showered by frag from the exploding artillery shells. Even if it is receiving any damage, though, the Americans on the ground are unable to tell, and simply watch in awe for almost an hour as the craft weathers the bombardment of the village. Then, the craft turns its sights on the Americans. With no warning, the craft turns in place and now moves directly toward the American position. The men are